Welcome to Historically Speaking. Our episode this time is on appreciating architecture of Greater Rutland, and my guest and co-host for this episode is Jim Boughton, who followed through with an assigned task of taking pictures of historic buildings in Greater Rutland. So a little bit of context about this. This stems from a very popular field assignment that I used to do in American Studies, where we give the students some basic elements of architectural styles, and then they go out into the community, they take pictures or sketch these things. And the overall purpose of the assignment was to make students more aware of how much rich history there is in the building of our communities, and it also develops a sense of community pride. And I can tell you, over the years, this was an enduring assignment, because when people talk about it 25, 30 years later, or parents say, I was out with my son or daughter and they said, oh, you know, there's a turret or there's a Queen Anne house, you know the assignment was successful. So before we survey the wonderful pictures that you took, we're just going to have an overview of the two very, very broad types of style that are represented in the pictures that you took. So many of our homes and public buildings in Greater Rutland have elements of classical, that is, hearkening back to Greece and Rome, but really neoclassical style. And a couple of the things that we can look for is that you have the three orders of columns. So the basic column with the flat cap is Doric. The Ionic is the one with the scroll, and the more elaborate one is Corinthian. And the columns would hold up a pediment, which consists of, and we don't need to get this technical, the architrave, the frieze, and the cornice. And what's missing from what you see labeled here as the frieze, this was often decorated with bas-relief, so some kind of sculpture militaristic. The other thing that we see here in the lower left-hand corner, and this is going to be a dominating motif of architecture, is what we call the temple front, because one of the most influential buildings in history is the Parthenon in ancient Greece. So as this gets translated into architecture, we have various types of pediments that you see here. So in the one that is very, very elaborate in the upper left-hand corner is a broken pediment. Not that it needs to be fixed, but instead of the 2 points of the pediment coming up into a peak, there's a space there. And what you see at level on the architrave is a plinth, because probably in its original form, there was probably a statue or an urn there. And you can see that there is a decorated frieze. In the one that is immediately to the right, we have another example of a pediment with a circular vent window. And those things that look like teeth between the roofline, they're called dentils. So certainly the name tells all with that. And then in the lower left-hand corner, we have a wonderful example of a pediment, a broken pediment with a pineapple on the plinth. And if you notice on either side of the door, they are Doric pilasters, or pilasters, as the Southerners would say. And the difference between a column and a pilaster is that a pilaster is flat up against the wall, whereas a column is three-dimensional. So in the last image, at right, what type of columns do you see, Mr. Boughton? They are Ionic.
Ionic.
So Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Some other elements that you will often see in neoclassical architecture. We have some very attractive pilasters here with Corinthian tops. Urns are very popular as a motif. We also have balustrades that you can see here, which are usually ornamental. And then a basic principle of Roman architecture that distinguished it from Greek architecture is an arch with a keystone, and the keystone is what holds it into place. And one of the most enduring architects of the American landscape is Thomas Jefferson, who designed the rotunda of the University of Virginia. So all this goes under the blanket of neoclassical or colonial architecture, because after all, we took these forms of architecture from colonial England. And in terms of domestic style, in the upper left-hand corner, we have a colonial house, a two-story colonial house that is very symmetrical. So in many New England houses that follow this principle of Georgian architecture, the key word is symmetry. In the image below, this is what I would call Georgian architecture on steroids, and this is what we call the federal style. And the federal style seeks to create height and volume, and to give a little bit of variety, you notice that the middle part of the building is extended outward, so it's not just a flat facade. And it's always interesting, I think, to look at doorways of these homes, because you have a fan light, which is over the door, again, to let in light, because there would be no electricity when these homes were built. And then you also have side lights to the left and the right of the door. We have at left an architectural element that is purely decorative. They're called coins, Q-U-O-I-N-S. And one of the things that was imported from Italy, very popular, are Palladian windows. And the Palladian windows consist of two windows with a rounded arch window in between. So now we get into the difference with Romantic architecture. And probably one of the best ways to distinguish between neoclassical architecture and Romantic architecture is Romantic architecture harkens back to Rome, harkens back to the Middle Ages, and is often more playful, more whimsical, and also very, very symmetrical. So in the church tower that we see here, again, you have a Gothic arch in the church tower, and where you see at the top, that's castellation, and that's purely decorative because they wouldn't have been shooting arrows down like they were if it were a castle. You often see in Romantic architecture, as we can see here in this dormer, is verge board, the decorated tracery that you see here. In this, the house that is here probably was a Georgian house, and then during Romantic times, they encased it with elaborate Romantic decorations. And again, tracery like you would see in a lot of church windows. And just a couple of other things that we can notice here: eyelid windows, and we have belvederes, which are little houses atop the roofs of Romantic houses, purely decorative, and belvedere comes from the Latin word for beautiful view. And again, different elements of Romantic architecture, and we have in the collection of spindles here, we have a Doric post, and then the other things we simply call decorative posts. So just a few examples here to distinguish this style. This would be an Italianate style Romantic. It has a bay window. Many of these Romantic houses have porches because in the Romantic era there was this communing with nature, so they wanted to make sure that the homes had a place that people could sit on their porch and enjoy the environment. And the last image in the center is what we call the shingle style. Very eclectic, very asymmetrical, wraparound porches, different roof lines. So probably the starkest comparison, if you think of a very linear, symmetrical Georgian facade, everything of one flat plane, and then a century later you have the shingle style. And again, typical example of an Italianate house, Second Empire. And what makes this a Second Empire, named after the Second Empire in France beginning in 1870, is the mansard roof. So the mansard roof is a steep roof line that was mimicking what you would find in cities like Paris, because houses were taxed by the number of stories that they had, and the mansard roof provided living space on the third story, but you wouldn't be taxed because it was not a full story. So with all that in mind, it takes us to your first picture.
Right. I took this picture. Driver, you gave me this project to do, and it just opened my eyes to the architecture that's around Rutland County. I think I've always been aware of the architecture. I'm an artist myself. Don't know much at all about architecture, but so this building just stood out. It's very symmetrical. It's just basically a box. And I would say, just from listening to you in the last couple of minutes, that would be, is that a federal?
No,
style?
it would be Georgian, because if it were federal, it would be taller. 3 stories. But I think this is a period house. I would say that this house is either side of 1800. And you know, it's a giveaway for a house that's period rather than one that's built in a colonial style years later. The period houses are almost flat to the ground because they would not have had basements. They probably would have had a small crawl space under the house, but that's a giveaway sign. And if you notice here, you have a fan light over the door. So this is very much a period house. Now, how about this one?
So that, would that be a Georgian?
Yep, that's Georgian.
House, right? And then we've got the pillars in the front. I'm not sure what those would be called. I can't really see.
They're probably Doric, but here is an example. In its original form, this Georgian house would not have had a covered porch. So this is where homes that have been continuously lived in for centuries, they're going to be modified over time. We're always doing home renovations. So the porch is definitely a 19th century add-on, but certainly the house is a period house. It's certainly, I think it's later than the first one that you saw because it's a little bit more elaborate. So if you notice over the windows, there are lintels, decorative lintels. And you probably can't see it because of the trees, but it probably has end chimneys. So the end chimneys are probably the means by which the house was heated.
And the difference between this house and the last house we saw, is this one brick and the last one was wood? Is there a difference in architectural?
Well, probably, if people lived near brickworks, they would have used brick. And probably it was more expensive to complete a brick house than it would have been a wooden house. And here's another brick house. So what do you notice about this one?
Well, this one is very symmetrical, but the front porch looks a little different to me. Was that probably added on
I think
later?
So. I think so. And as you look at this, what is another thing that you can logically assume that was added at a much later date?
Maybe on the side of the house, on the where the attic would be, that window. I guess that's a window up there.
Yeah, and it's a Gothic window.
Yeah.
So very much Gothic would be more akin to Romanticism, and they probably only had an attic vent, so they put the window in at a later time. So this is proof that with domestic architecture, it's rare to have it all of one piece without changes over time. And again, nice front-on shot of this house. And again, it is an older house. We know that. There's probably a historic plaque, and you can see the chimneys in it. Now, how about with this? What appealed to you about this?
Okay, so I've driven by this house so many times, and it's always stood out to me because of the two side walls.
Mm-hmm.
They extend higher than the house, and I've never known why that is. It doesn't seem like that's a structural need for this house.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting, and I don't think I've seen many of these homes in Rutland County like this.
Right, and I think in this next one you can see it front on, as you can see there. But I think for us to understand what's going on here, this is an architectural style that you would have found in New York along the Hudson River, because this type of raised roof walls are from Amsterdam. And the other thing that's strange about this house, the purpose of these elongated side walls is that this was once not built here, but this style was for row houses. And there was a concern that as live cinders went up from the chimney, by having, these are really firewalls.
Your roof would be exposed.
Exactly. So this
right?
is where they literally lifted out the style from row houses and built it in this way. But you're right that we don't have a lot of examples here. But they're going for symmetry here. So you have the three windows across front within an arch, and then a little keystone. So it's a very, very eclectic style, that's for sure.
Okay. Yes. So, I've seen these windows throughout Vermont. Not a lot, but they always stand out to me. And I think I remember from years ago, there's a certain name for them, and I can't remember what that is. But I've always thought they were interesting. I imagine that's in a staircase going upstairs, probably.
Well,
I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I think the original house started with what you see on the far right. So I think that was the original house. And it was probably a cape, so it was very basic housing. And what happened over time is the houses expand. So eventually what happened, there was an add-on that went out to the barn so they wouldn't have to walk outside. But this is an example, I think, of Yankee ingenuity, because without putting a dormer on the house, they wanted light in the attic, so they probably had a leftover window and stuck it on the side.
So you can almost imagine that window without that addition, that middle part, that window could have been
exactly.
Upright.
So it must be difficult to slide it up into the side, but
Right.
This is just, I think, a good example of utilitarian Vermont architecture, and probably, I'd say this probably dates from the 1840s. Now we're in a completely different realm here. So what impresses you about this house?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, just the symmetry of it, but that front rounded porch with the columns, it commands your attention.
Mm-hmm. And this would be an indication of colonial revival, because certainly it would have been inspired by Georgian architecture, and there was a rage in the teens and the 20s to build in this style. So some aspects of it are very colonial, but you wouldn't have found triple windows on the first floor. The other thing that's a very common feature of these colonial revival houses is at left, that's probably a solarium, a sunroom, sun parlor, whatever you want to call it. And you took some other detailed pictures of this house. I love this. So here you can clearly see the Corinthian columns. You have dentils going around the rounded porch. You have a balustrade with decorative urns on it. So this was very much a house that indicated that the owners were prominent enough, wealthy enough, that they could pull out all the stops on that colonial revival style.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one, is unusual in Vermont, I think. And what drew me to this, I've seen this house hundreds of times, is all the columns and how tall the columns are as well.
Yeah, so this is Greek Revival. And again, you can see the temple front, so hearkening back to the Parthenon. But the interesting thing about this is the original house likely is what you see at the back. And as the family grew in prosperity, they would move forward and build the Greek temple front house on this. So you've got lovely Ionic colonnades. But having been in a number of these houses, they are surprisingly small inside because, your porch goes around 3 sides of the house. So the space that you see under the roof line is very, very small. The other thing that's worth a mention with this style was certainly influenced by the decision to lay out the city of Washington in the way that it was, because until the capital city, the District of Columbia, was laid out in the 1790s, the style that was chosen for public buildings would be the classical style. So again, we were a brand new country, but in our public buildings, we wanted to have this symbolism of something that was more rooted in history. So the phrase that became associated with the early public buildings in Washington was temples of democracy, because it harkens back to what you would have seen in Greece. This particular style, ironically, is very popular in southern plantations. So again, the irony that you're using a democratic style of a plantation house that is a slave society. And again, a lovely shot of how well preserved this house is. And one of the things that you often had, because the main part of the house isn't terribly roomy, so they would build wings on either side, often symmetrical. And in the South, these wings would be called dependencies, because often in the South, because of the danger of fire, they would always have the kitchen in separate establishments. So a very fine example of a Greek Revival house. Again, what do you notice about this one?
Excuse me. This one stood out to me because, and it's hard to see in this picture, but the house is fairly narrow in the front. It only has the 2 windows in the bottom, 1 window on the top, and then the house continues in the back, but it's much smaller in the back.
So let's see if we can see. You can see with the wings in the back.
It almost gives you the feel that if you're standing in front of the house, you think this is a very, very large house, which it is, but it really kind of shrinks down as soon as you get past that first 2 windows on the first floor.
So I think that, again, moving back here, that it's a way of saying we want the temple front, maybe not as elaborate as we saw. They put the balcony there, but it is a way of showing prosperity. It's kind of keeping up with the Joneses. We have our version of a Greek Revival house, maybe not as elaborate as some of the others. This I would probably date to the 1840s, and once again, because it is very low to the ground, I'm sure that it is a period house. And again, nice frontal shot of that house.
Yeah, this building has stood out to me. This is in Rutland. I think it's beautiful. I love the weathered look on the brick. I love the arches over the windows. It's a pretty simple house. I think there's another view of the side of it. And I don't know what that would be.
Well, so
calls.
here is, so let's think this through, because on the one hand, it's simple in style, but what is the overwhelming difference here that you note between this house and, let's say, a Georgian house?
Right, so maybe the symmetry, the door is not in the center of the building?
Yep. But also, you have the gable end to the street. So this is a change that came about as a result of Romantic architecture, because it's still an homage to a temple front. So by having the pediment facing you, and again, these are really Greek. These are basic Doric pilasters in brick. So this is a modification of a Greek revival style with the temple front facing the street. And again, you can almost predict what the interior of this house is going to look like, because the stairway, you would have the stairway going up right there. And there are a lot of houses in this neighborhood that were built around this time. So I would say that this was built between roughly 1840 and 1860. And you have a nice rounded window in the attic. Now again, a very, very different thing that we have here. So this would be a Second Empire house. A lot of Second Empire features. You have the mansard roof. And the other thing that you often see on these houses are bay windows, because since the Romantics, as we said, embraces the love of nature, when you put a bay window on the house, you have the opportunity for a cross breeze. And houses like this, especially with the price of fuel, they're very difficult to maintain. And there was a time when beautiful period homes like this would be torn down. So the way that a lot of these homes, and I would date this one from around 1870, the only way that they survive is that they are made into apartments. And again, nice close-up here of the roof line and the dormers that you see in a very eclectic style, because you have some rounded, they're called drip caps. So what you see above that in the roof line is that when the water comes down, it would roll off the drip line. So a fun house. And these are the kind of houses that we think of, if they were painted black, they would be haunted houses.
Right, that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah. And again, this addition at the back of the house, I'm sure, is period. So why do you think you have different floor heights and a lower roof line at the back of the house?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Well, this was once a wealthy person's house, and undoubtedly they had servants.
Right.
So for that delineation of the public space of the house and where the servants lived, the servants would be relegated to these rooms, and this is where the kitchen and the pantries would be back here. So this has been a lot of fun for you to do this. I thank you for doing it. And once again, it's just a reminder of how much rich history that we have here that reflects not only period styles, but how people would still want to go back and harken back, like in that colonial revival house. And it's so different than when you go to a place, not to disparage Florida, but where my grandmother lived in a development that was placed over a swamp. If you ever came home late at night, you wouldn't necessarily know you were in the right driveway,
right.
because they were all alike, and we don't see that here.
Right.
So thanks again, and I look forward to a possible part 2 with this.
I'd love to. Thank you
Great.
very much, Michael.
You're welcome.